Joining us now, former Secretary of Homeland Security under President Obama, Jeh Johnson. Today is the 20th anniversary of the formation of the Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Secretary, good to see you today.
Thanks, Willie.
So I was checking the dates. The March 1st, 2003, 18 months after September 11th, Homeland Security, Department of Homeland Security was formed. How has it evolved over those 20 years as something to protect our country, our borders after the horrifying attacks of 9/11, to now something that primarily, and in this moment anyway, is looking at the southern border of this country and the chaos that's happening down there?
Willie, I think the better question is how have circumstances evolved, and has DHS kept up with those circumstances? So, as everybody knows, the Department of Homeland Security was created in the wake of 9/11, in reaction to 9/11. For the longest time, this nation believed we did not need any sort of Ministry of the Interior or Department of Public Safety because we had two oceans to protect us from the rest of the world. At the time, in 2002, 2003, Congress thought that the way to deal with terrorism, and terrorism was the reason the department was created, the way to deal with terrorism was to better secure our borders. Terrorism was regarded then as an extraterritorial threat from beyond our borders. And if you put into one cabinet level department all the different ways of regulating how someone enters this country, land, sea, and air, TSA, Coast Guard, Customs, Border Patrol, you've effectively dealt with terrorism. That's an outdated way of looking at terrorism. Most terrorist attacks these days are domestic-based, domestic in nature, and there are not a whole lot of DHS cops running around the world. Around the country, the interior of the country. The good news is that DHS has, I think, taken on well the cybersecurity mission, which didn't really exist in 2003. Through CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is part of DHS, and through the able leadership of first Chris Krebs and now Jen Easterly, I think DHS is well positioned to try to address our cybersecurity threats in this country. And the people in DHS don't really like to admit this. The department is overwhelmed by the southern border. Yeah. And to the exclusion of a lot of other challenges we face right now.
And you've called it a crisis on this show for a long time, what's happening at the southern border. That's undeniable. There are now Republicans in power in the House calling for the resignation or the impeachment, perhaps, of Secretary Mayorkas. What is the role and responsibility of the Department of Homeland Security at the southern border as it fits into all these other agencies as well?
Well, of course, there's the Border Patrol. Yeah. There's Customs at the ports. There's ICE that detains and removes people. And the problem now on the southern border, frankly, is much bigger than it was 8-9 years ago when I owned this problem. The capabilities to deal with the problem are also much bigger. The scale of our resources on the southern border is much bigger, yet we still struggle to keep up. There are new initiatives that DHS announced a couple of weeks ago to try to encourage people to enter the country the right way versus the wrong way to be considered for asylum. But this all tracks back to whether you're talking about migrant children working in slaughterhouses or the numbers on the southern border, it all tracks back to the circumstances that exist in Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. And as long as those nations are as unstable, violent, corrupt, and impoverished as they are, we're going to keep dealing with this problem over and over, administration after administration.
So, Mr. Secretary, you, of course, very familiar with the federal bureaucracy and how agencies can have differing opinions. I wanted to get you in on this idea from the Department of Energy, its report that it has a low confidence in this belief that COVID leaked from a lab there in China. We heard from FBI Director Wray, though, voicing a little more support for that theory, more confidence to it. Just explain to the viewers what that means, the divergence of opinions, and what needs to be done here potentially beyond China, of course, cooperating. But just explain the schism in the federal government over this particular matter.
So Richard will have some insights on this too. When I heard that report, I imagined how I would react if I were still in office, reading the daily intelligence briefings. If I saw a division of opinion among intelligence agencies on a conclusion, and there's a minority view out there with low confidence, I wouldn't make much of that. I certainly would not make any major policy choices based on what I'm reading. And very often, when I was in office and I would read something from an intelligence agency with a dissent, I'd say to my people, bring the analyst who wrote the one opinion and the dissenting opinion up here, and I want to talk to them directly. And very often when you probe the differences of view, you find that there's an assumption that one makes that the other doesn't make. But when you're faced with this kind of division, it's not a circumstance where you make a major policy choice or decision.
It's quite possible here that we'll never be able to resolve the differences simply because we're never going to have access to some of the basic information. That's clearly China's thing. Can we return back to the Department of Homeland Security for a second? In some ways, is this an agency designed to fail? The range of missions is so large, and some of them deal with how do we help Americans after natural disasters, as opposed to all the things on the security side. It seems to me that we've created something that has so many different cultures and missions in it that, would we do it again, knowing what we now know? Is this the best way to try to tackle all these problems?
DHS, like everything in Washington, was a political compromise. In some ways, it went too far. In other ways, it didn't go far enough. And as I said earlier, the ideas were based on the circumstances that existed at the time. Richard, DHS feels very big because it's got a lot of diverse cultures and missions, but it's a fraction of the size of the Department of Defense. It's even a fraction of the size of the Department of the Army. And it is manageable as long as there are skilled component heads running each one of these departments, TSA, Secret Service, FEMA. And there is a common mission, which is to secure the homeland, public safety nationwide. And as long as you have skilled leadership, not distracted by the daily foolishness in Washington about, with the rhetoric, it can be done.
Can I just one quick thing? Do you think it's seized with the mission of dealing with the potential for domestic political terrorism? Do you think that's a big enough priority for DHS, homegrown now political challenge?
The honest answer, Richard, is that DHS is not equipped to deal with domestic-based political terrorism. That was not part of the thinking in 2003 when it was created. In 2003, we thought of terrorism as foreign terrorist organizations, Al-Qaeda, then ISIS. And the task of dealing with domestic-based terrorism has fallen largely to the FBI.
I'll ask you about the train derailment, Mr. Secretary, in East Palestine, Ohio. We're going to have Secretary Buttigieg on in just a little while on this show and ask him some questions about the administration's response. How do you believe the EPA, how do you believe the Department of Transportation, and yes, how has the President of the United States handled this incident in Ohio?
I'm sure that there are hundreds of federal officials on the ground right now from all of those departments dealing with this. A lot of people have pointed to the relaxation of rail safety regulations during the Trump administration. When it comes to the political leadership, President Biden, the first impulse after a tragedy like this or a natural disaster is for the president or even the secretary of DHS, I've got to go there. And then the head of FEMA will say, it's too early. If you go there, you will overwhelm the security situation there. You will draw from local first responders for your own security who are trying to deal with this. Wait a few days. The sweet spot for a visit to East Palestine was probably while President Biden was in Ukraine. And then what often happens is there's pushback because the president or even the secretary thinks, if I go there now, it's just for political purposes. It's never too late, in my experience, for a president, and this president in particular knows how to do this. Empathy is natural to him. It's never too late to show up. The other thing I'll add is when people on the ground, federal officials on the ground, know that the president is coming, they work just a little harder because they want the president to hear good news stories from the local population about what the feds are doing there when the president gets there.
John, is the White House moving toward a presidential visit to East Palestine? They've said to be considering it now for several days. Is that coming?
That is still where they are, considering it. We heard from President Biden almost acting defensive about it the other day, suggesting that it wasn't his, that these regulations were rolled back on the Trump administration. He's right about that. But he said that at that moment he had no plans to go. White House officials are talking about a possible visit. Nothing's on the books yet, but I could see sometime in the next week or so the president, perhaps the vice president, makes that trip.
Well, as I said, we'll talk to Secretary Buttigieg in just a little bit. Mr. Secretary, we ran out of time to talk about your model train collection.
Next time.
I promise next time you're here. One of the largest on the eastern seaboard, from what I hear.
Just learned.
Former Secretary Jay Johnson.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Mr. Secretary. Still ahead.